Hello, friends. Welcome to Coding Garden. Welcome to Dev News. There is a lot happening in the world of JavaScript and the web, and today we're going to talk about it. So let's do it. Welcome in, everyone. Good to see you. Yeah, the sticker on my laptop is free debugs. Free debugs. If you go to coding.garden/support, this is going to make me restart Firefox. Okay, we can't get started. Give me a second. I need to restart Firefox. Well, thank you, Blinky Doo. I appreciate that. What's up, Mitzik? Good to see you. What's up, I am Ruse? Good to see you too. All right, let me make sure all my tabs are reloaded. Yeah, hello friend is from Mr. Robot. Yeah, there's lots of little Easter eggs on all of my stickers. Also, I've got these syntax skateboards like that. Can I send that sticker back as a coupon? No, if you see me IRL. You can just ask me for free debugs. No coupon required. But welcome in, everyone. It's good to see you. I'm having a day. If you saw in the thumbnail, I planned on not wearing a hat, but then I was like, I don't like the way my hair looks. Now I'm late, but go to coding.garden/support. There are a bunch of links on ways to support me, but one of them is to buy stickers on Redbubble. And if you go there, there is the free debugs sticker. If you see me in person, usually I have some of these on me and I give those out as well. Good luck getting past the CJ bodyguard. Oh, you mean if you see me IRL? Yeah. Yeah, and so that's what we're going to talk about today, Avi. The very first story we've got for you is the fact that you won't be able to use IO domains anymore. Potentially. We're going to talk about the implications, what it means, what could actually happen. We'll get into it. Let's go ahead and welcome everybody in, say hello, and we'll talk about the news, because there's a lot happening. So if you would like me to say hello to you, you can say hi, hello, hey, yo, cheers, greetings, hi, what's up, morning, afternoon, good day, coding, hi-yo, vohio, say anything that matches this regular expression. Here it is. Here it is. Hello is the easiest thing. Sometimes the greetings don't make it through if you get weird with it. Let's go back in time to Arian was the first to say hello. Welcome in, Arian. What's up, Stony Eagle? And Obi-Wan, you know me. Hello. What's up, SRG Learn Code? And Timothy, hello, hello. What's up, Alka? You're about to go to bed? Well, stick around. We got news for you. What's up, Limotes and Oscar and Fob and Moreland? Good to see you. What's up, I am Ruse? And C'est le Pingouin. And Andrew, thank you for the resub. Yeah, the teams and the badges still work. If you do !flag or !country followed by your 2-character country code, you can set the flag next to your name to be that country flag. But this is relevant because we're going to be talking about IO domains, and IO is a 2-character country code that is going away, which is why the domain potentially will no longer exist. But in solidarity, everybody could set their country to IO and set their flag as the Indian Ocean flag. But that's a thing. Yeah, and then if you want to set teams, there's a way to do that too. !badges, it has all of the info on how you can set your team badges. Like C'est le Pingouin is the Svelte team, and I am Ruse is the CSS team, and Fob is on the Laravel team, so you can set your team. What's up, SMC May? I Boga Hey. What's up, Pitts and Mitzik and Vivian and Physitronic and Lucas and Ched and Razorson and Andrew and Scott. Hello. Welcome in. Good to see you. Last time I watched your stream, you quit the job and worked on some product. Are you still working on the same? Well, I'm not working on a product. I'm working with the Syntax team. So Syntax was a podcast. Now we're a network, a platform where we make web dev and dev related content. So the Syntax podcast is hosted by Wes and Scott. And then I've been making content for their YouTube channel. So if you look at the Syntax YouTube channel, I've been publishing lots of videos that dive into the topics that are covered on the Syntax podcast, and then also topics that I'm interested in. If you are a fan of me, go to the Syntax YouTube channel, click on playlists, and there is a playlist called CJ at Syntax. You can see all of the videos and podcast episodes that I've been on since I started over at Syntax. So if you missed it, go follow the Syntax channel. You can see all the stuff that I've been up to. Sweet. Okay. Yeah. Let me catch up, see if there's anything I missed in the chat. But let's get into it. Let's get into our first news story. Avi is priming us here. That's in there saying, I have read an article about how website owners won't be able to use IO domains in the future. What does that mean? Yes, salute to the IO domain. Okay, so first of all, check out this article. So I'll link it in the description. And it talks all about what this means and the geopolitical aspect of it all. I'm going to try to summarize for you, but basically there is let's start at the standards organization. So there is a standards organization that has standardized the 2-character country codes, right? So I live in the United States of America. Our 2-character country code is US. If you live in Japan, your 2-character country code is JP. If you live in the Indian Ocean, or I think that's what it is, Indian Ocean, your 2-character code is IO. Put your 2-character country code in the chat for wherever you live in the world. But that's a standard. It is a specification. You can see it here. Every single 2-character country code is listed here. Yeah, we've got NL, CL, EG, IL, PL. I don't know what a lot of these are. I guess Israel, Egypt, AR, RO, MX is Mexico. I know that one. So yes, 2-character country codes. It's a standard. So start there. We have a standard of 2-character country codes. And if we look in here, there is one for IO. Right here. The 2-character country code is for the British Indian Ocean Territory. However, there is recent news that it is no longer going to be a British territory. So it's been a British territory since 1968, I believe this article is saying. But the news says, where are we at? Maybe it's on the Wikipedia page. Yeah, so negotiations between the UK and Mauritius? This is another country. Negotiations between the UK and the Mauritius began in November 2022 and culminated in October 2024. So that's this month. An agreement that the UK would eventually cede the territory. So the British Indian Ocean Territory, they're ceding that territory to Mauritius while retaining the joint US-UK military base. But what that means is that the British Indian Ocean Territory is no longer going to be its own country. Yeah, so what country is AI? We can look it up. I mean, it's going to be at the top of this list because it's in alphabetical order. AI is Anguilla. And so that's the other thing to note. Yeah, Anguilla. That's another thing to note about this. If you come across any TLD or any top-level domain that is 2 characters, there is a standard that says top-level domains that are 2 characters can only be country codes. So anyone you come across, AI, IO, SH. SH is one that's used by developers a ton. Let's see what that one is. SH is Saint Helena, Ascension, and Tristan de Cunha. Another one used by developers a lot is like PW, I guess because it's like password or whatever. But PW is Palo. I know TV is Tel Aviv. So even if you're watching on Twitch right now, twitch.tv is technically, oh no, never mind. There's not Tel Aviv. It's Tuvalu, the country Tuvalu. So any domain you come across that's 2 characters has to be a country code. And that is a specification as well. So there's this organization called ICANN that standardizes what domains can be. Yeah, Tel Aviv, I got that wrong. It's not TV. Tel Aviv is a city. You're completely right. Tuvalu is TV. So I guess ICANN, maybe I got my governing organizations wrong. ICANN is for domain. I think the IANA is the Internet Assigned Numbers Authority. They're in charge of choosing what the top level domains can be. And Taco Bandit, thank you for the 2 gifted. I appreciate that. But basically, this is a governing organization. The Internet Assigned Numbers Authority gets to decide what all of the top-level domains are. And so, like, if you've ever gone to buy a domain, like on namecheap.com, you can see my cool website. You can see all the different types of TLDs or top-level domains. So .site, .net, .ai, .gg. So GG, that's another one. Again, if you see a 2-character TLD, top-level domain, that is a country. So what is the GG one? GG? GG? Guernsey? Ballywick of Guernsey? But you see a lot of gamers using GG because it's like good game, you know? But that's a country TLD. And then IO is the British territory of the Indian Ocean. Okay, .me, is this a country code? Because .me, I thought, is that like an exception to the rule? Because I thought .me was all about having like personal websites. No, it's not. ME is Montenegro. But they've advertised it as a TLD that people can use to like make their own websites, but it still technically is a top-level domain that belongs to a country. Yeah. Fascinating to see. So, and of course, like .us, but there's literally a standard by the Internet Assigned Names Organization that says a top-level domain with 2 characters can only be a country. It can only be a country. Everything else is owned by like private organizations that manage the root domain servers and manage signups for those various domains. And then there's like those super common top-level domains like CO is Colombia. Yeah, that's another one that that's used heavily because people use .co to represent a company. But if you look at the CO country code, Colombia. Yeah. EU is the European Union. I think technically the European Union is in the standard here for ISO country codes, even though it's not a country. So maybe that just has to do with the standard of creating 2-character country codes. Because you're right, like European Union isn't a country, it's a union, right? I don't know, maybe there's exceptions to the fact, but it's part of this standard, which makes it fall in under the Internet Assigned Names Authority deal that top-level domains can only be assigned to countries. So, with all of that said, because the British Indian Ocean Territory is no longer going to be its own country, it's going to be removed from this standard. It is no longer going to be in the standard. They're going to release a new version of the standard, and it's not going to have IO there anymore. And so what that means is it no longer adheres to the rule that top-level domains can only be for 2-character country codes from the ISO 3166-1 standard. And if you read this article, they talk about a case that happened specifically with the USSR. So yeah, they delegated the .su domain to the USSR, and the USSR is no longer a country. And let's see, SU is still here? Yeah. Officially assigned before deleted from ISO 3166-1. Now assigned ISO 3166-3 code SUHH. So there was a whole deal when that happened, because that's when the thought came up, okay, well, people that own this .su domain, what's going to happen now that whenever the USR was dissolved? So yeah, they actually have a ruling around it. Yeah, the SUHH top-level domain, that'd be cool. I don't think there's top-level domains for the 3166-3 standard. But if you look, yeah, this specific page talks about the retirement of a country code top-level domain. So it says, this document provides a guide to the process of retiring a country code top-level domain when the underlying country or territory no longer exists or is otherwise removed from the relevant standards. So this is the situation we're in. The British Indian Ocean Territory will no longer exist, so they have to do something. And they have guidelines on this. So it says the eligibility is determined by the country or territory assigned to that standard. But when the CCTLD is no longer eligible, the IANA will notify the manager that that TLD is due for retirement. And then by default, it will be removed after 5 years. The TLD will be publicly advertised as under retirement with the target removal date. So what this means, and I think like if you saw this, you're like, oh no, IO domains are going away. Technically, according to these rules, there will be at least 5 years before IO domains have to fully go away if they adhere to their principles here. So So yeah, the manager may apply for an extension with appropriate justification. Extensions are limited to a maximum of 5 additional years. Therefore, the maximum possible period for retirement is 10 years. So what could happen is they ask for an extension and then it potentially gets retired 10 years later. I think this is probably what's going to happen because there is no official place where you can see the number of domains registered for a specific TLD. But I saw some Twitter posts about like various like web scraping tools and web scanning tools, and there are over 1 million estimated websites that resolve to a .io domain. So this is huge. Like the number of websites that would potentially break if the IO domain went completely away is very big. And so I think that probably is going to justify some sort of extension. And so according to these principles, yes, Eddie, the IO domains wouldn't work anymore after the extension. It's also possible that because it's unprecedented, because there are so many domains using that top level domain, or so many websites using that top level domain, maybe they come up with a new rule that's like, if it's in use by X number, then it's allowed to continue, but it needs to be adopted into, like, it needs to be managed by someone else. Because that's the other possibility, right? Is they grandfather it into the country that is gaining ownership over the British Indian Ocean Territory. So I don't know, can someone in the chat tell me how to pronounce this? Mauritius? I guess Wikipedia can tell me how to pronounce this. The Republic of Mauritius. Mauritius, right? Mauritius? Mauritius. Is it Mauritius? Mauritius. Okay, so sorry for pronouncing it wrong. Mauritius. What could happen is they could potentially grandfather in the ownership to Mauritius. I think that's another possibility, right? So, like, because it's unprecedented, because there's so many websites that have IO domains, maybe they're like, all right, Mauritius, you're now in charge. You can now be in charge of the IO domain, and it's not actually going to go away because you technically contain the India Ocean. Who knows? It's completely up to the Internet Assigned Names Authority to decide what's going to happen there. There was a pronunciation recording. No, this is the anthem for the motherland. I don't see it. I don't see it. So that could happen as well. I think the thing to think about though is, okay, let's actually look and see what's the cost of registering a .io domain. And the cost varies because a lot of these registrars will charge more if your domain is like short and like very desirable. But for like a really long basic name that isn't taken by anything else, the registration price, at least on Namecheap, is $45 a year for the first year and $50 a year for the next year. I think, is DomComp still a thing? This website shows domain prices across a bunch of registrars. So you can get it cheaper. Yeah, you can see Spaceship has .io domains for $32. Porkbun has it for $37. So, like, let's say like roughly $30 per registration. Exactly. That's the point I'm making, Ched. If you have over 1 million registrations that are all paying between $30 and $40 a year, let's do the basic maths, right? 1 million, how many? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 times 30 is 30 million. So that's $30 million at a minimum in annual revenue. So it would be fortuitous for Mauritius to want to take over the management of that domain, because that's between 30 and 40 or between 30 and $50 million a year in extra revenue that they could potentially get. So there's a lot of incentives to take it over. There's a lot of incentives to extend the registration. So I guess the TLDR is, at a minimum, it's going to be 5 years before IO domains are completely gone. And at a maximum, 10 years. And potentially there'll be an exception to the rule, and it'll go under new management, and it'll stick around. Lots of oosh words used, yeah. So that's the news. Definitely check out this article. Is fantastic. Like this article kind of reads like an explainer YouTube video. If it hasn't been created yet, somebody is probably going to plagiarize this article into a YouTube video that has like graphics of like the history of it and everything else and like all the info that I just talked about. But you got my hand wavy version with links to Wikipedia articles. So, but yeah, go check out that article. So that's the thing. So the company that I work at, Sentry, has an IO domain, sentry.io. So we're going to have to figure out, what do we do? What do we do? And it's a 404. Thank you for the resub. Appreciate that. So it's a thing. Yeah, it's a thing. All right, that's the news there. Yeah, any other comments about this or thoughts about it? Can I just spin up a DNS server and handle .io in 5 years myself? is what William Cameron just asked. There's a whole deal around it, right? It's a very specific process to be able to manage a top-level domain, especially a country top-level domain. I think you probably have to be an official representative of that country, but then now it's not going to exist anymore. I would imagine, Josie, that they have ownership of that domain. If they don't, they probably should. Yeah, time for .gg, and then GG disappears, but yeah. Cool. So that was super interesting news. I learned about this last night at a happy hour here in Denver, because we have the Denver Develop Happy Hour, but somebody brought it up, and then I saw the news on Twitter. So yeah, fascinating stuffs. All right, the next thing that I want to talk about is route level middlewares inside of next.js. So let me get all my resources up and going so we can talk about this stuff, because it's interesting, but it's not what you think. At least from my summation of reading this PR and proposal. And let's just pull up the Next.js docs, because we can look at middlewares too. I'm glad I gave up on Next.js v13. It is what it is. Has anybody made a diagram that shows how middlewares work on Vercel and in Next.js? Because it's an interesting implementation of it, because one of the reasons why middlewares have to be the way that they are inside of Next.js, and I'll talk about the way that they have to be the way they are, is that these middlewares actually exist on the edge. They do not exist with your deployed Next.js application, which means it's a specific type of runtime. There are implications of the actual page render. So because it runs on the edge, ultimately the page that gets rendered or routed to can send back like the appropriate status codes and everything else. Oh yeah, good call, I am Ruse. An aside, github.io is another big website. I guess okay, that's huge. I didn't even think about this. Every single GitHub Pages website is going to need a brand new domain. Like, that's the other aspect, is like, if that were the case, that would break URLs linked absolutely everywhere. That's huge. Like, I think all of this and all of the websites that exist that use .io domains are probably one of the reasons why there's going to be an extension in like special cases. Yeah, GitHub Pages. So like anybody who hosts their site on GitHub Pages, you go to github.io. So sitename.github.io is the TLD that's used. Yeah, exactly. A ton of broken links. Wow. Okay, but there's that. Let's see if there's a Next.js middleware diagram. Has anybody done it before? I don't think I have the time to draw the diagram. Here's a YouTube thumbnail. Because it's not this. It is absolutely, like, this is a gross simplification because there are multiple servers and networks involved. And that's why Next.js middleware is not like normal middleware, and it shouldn't even be called middleware, because if you've ever worked in any other backend framework or like literally anything that uses middlewares, it does not work in the same way. The links would be broken because if we get to the point where the IO domain no longer resolves at all, like it gets completely removed, everybody that was like linking to a GitHub Pages site in documentation or in a tweet or in a message, or like literally anybody that shared a github.io URL, that URL is now broken. And because the IO domain is completely gone, there's no way to create a redirect. There's no way to create a fixed redirect where if somebody accidentally goes to site.github.io, it redirects to their new domain, which is githubio.com or something like that. If the IO domain is completely gone, there's no way to add that redirect because the initial IO domain will not resolve at all. And then git.io was used for shortening links for a very long time. Yeah, and Microsoft owns GitHub, so they probably have some pull in negotiating and figuring things out with the internet, the IANA. I don't know why I keep saying the whole thing instead of saying the acronym. All right, well, let's talk about middlewares. Okay. I'll try to maybe do this as like a separate YouTube video. So yeah. You'll have to watch the VOD, Yash, or just rewind the stream, or I'm gonna probably cut that down into its own video and publish to YouTube. Actually, let me do a no worries, Yash. Let me do a little YouTube intro because I forgot to do that at the beginning. Hello, friends. Welcome to Coding Garden. In this video, we are going to talk about the fact that the IO domain is potentially going to be going away. We're going to talk about why. How do I want to intro this? We're going to talk about why that's the case and what potentially could happen. Okay, that's the intro. Hello, friends. Welcome to Coding Garden. In this video, we're going to talk about the fact that .io domains are potentially going away forever. We're going to talk about the implications and also talk about why they're going away and what's involved in that process. Okay, great work. Great work, everybody. We got a YouTube intro. All right, now we're going to talk about Next.js middlewares because it's interesting. So having worked with Next.js a bunch, this is something that I ran up against a ton. Okay. Hello, friends. Welcome to Coding Garden. In this video, we're going to talk about Next.js route level middlewares or interceptors. So you might have seen the tweet, you might have seen the draft PR. Next.js is getting experimental request interceptors, and we're going to talk about it. And we're going to talk about how it's a misleading name, it's not actually middlewares, and it solves maybe 20 to 30% of actual middleware use cases. It's still cool that it exists, but don't be deceived, it's not actually middlewares. So let's talk about it. So if you look at the Next.js documentation and you read about middlewares, you can see their potential use cases. So you can use middlewares to do redirects in terms of authentication and authorization. So if somebody is attempting to visit a page and they're not logged in or they don't have access to it, you can use a middleware to redirect them. You can do server-side redirects. So a lot of websites potentially have like the locale in the URL. So like yourwebsite.com/en will serve the English version and yourwebsite.com/JP will serve the Japanese version. And you can have a middleware that detects the users. You can have a middleware that detects the browser's accepted locales and then redirect the user in a non-intrusive way to the site that actually that is using their specific locale. You could also rewrite paths. So like if someone is making a request to a specific page, you could then have a middleware that actually serves up a different page or a different underlying router without changing what the actual URL is that's displayed. A middleware can sit in the middle between a user's request in your site and detect like incoming bots and prevent those. It can also do logging and analytics. So because the middleware is responding to potentially every single incoming request, it can send things to a logger. It can collect analytics of who's visiting your site. You could also do feature flagging. So depending on the incoming request and the incoming request headers, you can then serve back the site with certain features enabled or disabled. So middlewares allow you to do a lot, and they exist all over the place in software development. The whole middleware pattern is this idea that you can write code to essentially sit in the middle between some process. And so if we're talking specifically about backend request and response frameworks like Express or something like Next.js or something like Hono, a middleware sits in the middle and typically can see that incoming request, do something with it, potentially throw an error or redirect, add something to it, and then any other handlers that are later in the chain will then be affected by what that middleware actually did. So we talked about what middlewares can do, but if you look in the context of Next.js, their middlewares, you can only have one of them, one of them at the root of your application. So in Next.js, you use the file middleware.ts in the root of your project. So there is no way inside of Next.js currently to create a middleware that's specifically for one route, like with a specific file. So maybe you have a super nested route, it's multiple folders deep, and inside of there you want a middleware to run before some specific page loads. There's no way to do that at the route level. You have to do it in a single middleware file at the top. And so what that looks like in the real world is if you do want some sort of middleware like that, your middleware gets super bloated. Basically, this is just a bunch of if-else statements that's like, if the incoming path is this is the middleware that I want. If the incoming path is this is the middleware that I want. So if you ever need any kind of middleware like that, this function gets super bloated, super overrun, and sometimes hard to manage. What's nice is they do allow a matcher, though. So if you know that for your website, there are only certain endpoints that need middleware, you can put the matcher here and then throw it in here. And you know that this middleware is only going to get called if the path actually matches that matcher. But again, you still, if you have multiple different paths that require different types of middlewares, you would still have to handle all of that logic inside of here. And so you have access to the incoming request here. So you have the full request. You can look at the headers, you can look at the body, you can basically inspect the entire incoming request to decide what to do with it. But that is one of the biggest limitations when working in Next.js is this middleware can only live at the root of your project. You can only have one of them. And the matchers and the matchers can only match to specific routes. You found a good diagram? Yeah, let's check it out, Oscar. Thank you for that. Let's see. Do they talk about middlewares? Or you just said you may. Okay, I have to do the work. I have to look at this page and see if I find a good diagram. All right. We've got layouts. Sorry, no, it's okay, Oscar. I'll look through here. I don't think they mention middlewares in here. I mean, this would have been a good visual when I was talking about like specific paths, but I'm not going to worry about it. Okay, where do I want to go with this? And so right now, this is the only way that you can define middleware inside of Next.js. Now, there is a reason for it. Let me see if these docs use... I completely... Actually, let me mention that. This one, I'll cut this into the video. And like Manas Paul is mentioning, it's actually super ironic that where this blog post is hosted is on a .to domain. So TO is a country code, and the thing that they're talking about could actually happen to them if the TO country ever goes away. So yeah, okay. Let's talk. It mentions somewhere about Edge. Yes, here it is. The other caveat of Next.js middlewares in the context of deploying them to Vercel is that they only support the Edge runtime. And so when you're deploying a JavaScript-based application to Vercel, you can either deploy to the Edge runtime or to the Node.js runtime. If you're deploying to the Edge runtime, there's a lot of things that don't exist for you that you might need, like in the Node.js runtime, so it's a bit more limited. But, and so one aspect of that is all of the code that you write in that middleware file has to be able to run on the Edge runtime. You can't import certain modules that depend on running inside of a Node.js runtime. So that's another limitation, is it has to be Edge runtime compatible code. And then let me see if I can just draw a... why is the font? There we go. That's the font I want to see. How does that work with Node.js then, like hosting and local? So locally, when you do like next dev and you're running it locally on your machine, it's still, I believe, going to be running inside of a Node.js runtime because it's running on your machine. It's possible that their dev script loads the edge, like runs it so that it would be running inside of an edge runtime. I think it actually, let me correct that. I don't know the specifics of it, but I do know that when I've been messing around with middlewares, running my code locally, if I tried to do something in that middleware file that like imported something that wasn't available in the edge runtime, it would actually break locally. So the next dev script does take that into account, and it will error out if you're using something that needs Node.js inside of your middlewares. Yes. Well, don't call it out. We all saw it. And we knew what they meant. It's okay, Hedgehog. No worries. Okay, let me draw a quick diagram of what actually happens with middlewares in Next.js. So let's say you have the you have the user that's making the request. You then have the edge. And honestly, this can just be its own little box. Okay, so you got the edge, and then you have your serverless function. Okay. No, we're not talking about a new version of Docker. So basically what happens when a user is visiting your site based on Next.js that's like hosted inside of Vercel, if you have a middleware, like you're going to have some kind of like middleware's codes, and it's going to be running here on the edge. And then after that, any requests will then go on to the serverless function itself. So the user makes a request to your app. It's actually going to hit the edge network first. It's going to run through that middleware that's on the edge, and then it's going to go to your serverless function. And your serverless function could be in the edge runtime as well, but it also could be inside of Node.js. So these are actually separated out so that the middleware can run on the edge there. Isn't the edge only provided by Vercel, or is edge different than edge functions? I think like they call it the edge runtime, but yeah, I believe it's deploying to the edge, where like it's basically able to. I guess this is another diagram we could bring up. Edge computing. It's like a CDN, but for why does no one have good diagrams? Maybe I'm not good at searching for diagrams. It looks more like a firewall than a middleware. I don't know how to draw this, Stoney. What do you want me to do? I'll make it a small. Here we go. Here's our middleware. Less of a firewall, more of a little box. Okay, but yeah, honestly, here's we'll get there. Here's how to think about the edge. Well, don't do that. What are you doing? The edge responds with requests as close as possible to your end users. So you potentially can have an edge node that is in the West US. Can you go back to using that font, please? Thank you. Draw you an eagle. I don't have a. I'll have a way to do that. Okay. So yeah, we'll call this like West, US West. So running on the West Coast, so like in California. And then maybe we also have another node on the edge that's running in the East. And then maybe we have another one that's running centrally. So it's in like Colorado or I don't know, whatever is central to the US. And then you can imagine the same thing, but all around the world as well. Yeah. Well, okay. Just a quick aside. So Steve is mentioning, I didn't realize, but I also have a workaround middleware by doing some logic in auth/layouts, by doing auth checks and redirecting there as well. Here's the issue, Steve. Layouts render in parallel with any potential pages or components that are going to be rendered into those layouts. So I ran into this same issue too. I thought, oh, well, of course, just put your logic inside of the layout. It'll redirect accordingly. but the pages that get rendered into that layout are running at the exact same time. So you can't do something that says, like, don't even run the code or don't even load that page that is some nested page, because it's getting loaded at the exact same time as the layout. Everything is happening in parallel. That's one of the caveats, and one of the reasons why middleware is the way that it is and why it can't exist inside of the application is because of the way that they do streaming and the way that they do like parallel processing and parallel rendering. So do a test. So like if you have some auth code in your layout that's like checking for a user or checking for a cookie or whatever else, try to log that same thing inside of the page that you expected to be redirected from, and you'll see that it's undefined or it doesn't exist. And so that's one of the reasons why you can't do this kind of logic inside of a layout file, which is also crazy and is a crazy limitation. But yeah, try it, because I thought the same thing. I was like, oh, great, look, I figured out a middleware solution. Nope, that stuff's rendering in parallel. So yeah, okay, let's say you have like the EU edge, and then, or I don't know, imagine there is a server that is in every major city in the US, and that server gets a copy of your middleware whenever you deploy to something like Vercel, if you're deploying to the edge network. So this is what is going to potentially make it super fast to be able to respond to requests, is that when you deploy, this middleware that lives on the edge gets duplicated across the entire edge network. So like when you deploy to Vercel, that middleware function literally gets copied across the world. And so now it lives separate from your application. And so when a request comes in from a user, the edge router is potentially going to an edge for each ISO country code. Exactly. So when a request comes in from a user, the load balancer sitting here on the edge is going to figure out, oh, well, they need to, the closest edge node to them is this one over here, so I'm going to serve them from that specific edge node. And the whole idea with this edge network here is like it's very similar to a CDN or a content delivery network where you can have static assets distributed all around the world, but this allows you to distribute your server-side code all around the world. And so like one of the things about it is it's like super fast. It's because a user makes a request, it's going to serve them from the closest edge node to them. That middleware is going to run as close as possible to them. And then the request will go on to the serverless function. And there might actually be multiple instances of the serverless function as well. Like you could have, multiple of these. And then at the same time, if you're deploying your serverless functions to the edge network, then your serverless functions potentially could be distributed around and living on the edge as well. People give Vercel a lot of crap. They're doing a ton of stuff. When you say Vercel deploy, or when you push a new commit to your repo, like this is why sometimes people rack up really big bills, because like it's distributing that stuff around the world. But okay, a request comes in, it chooses the closest edge node to them. That middleware file that you wrote is running on that edge node, and then from there the request gets forwarded on to some serverless function instance. But because we're scaled out here, there's like a load balancer sitting here that actually decides which of these serverless functions is going to respond to that request. So we might have like there's like an LB here, and it hits the request, it gets the request, and then it decides, oh, well, this serverless function over here has less load right now, so I'm going to send that request here. But then another request comes in, and it's like, oh, well, that one's overloaded, so I'm going to spin up a new one and send the request here. And then similarly. So like there's this whole scaled architecture and whole scaled thing that happens when you deploy a node to Vercel. But because of this, think of it like this, that middleware.ts file that you wrote lives on the edge, which means when it like, will this bloat my Vercel build? This is just what happens whenever you deploy to Vercel. Okay, I'm going to try to finish this up before the ad break. So that middleware runs here, and it's running on a completely separate node outside of where your actual serverless functions are running. And so that's one of the reasons why it has to be completely separate and be able to run in the edge runtime, because it's being deployed in this way. You're right. Serverless functions can live on the edge too, but I think what that would look like is almost like it's routing within its own network. It still, I believe, would be hosted separately. It's possible that they deploy that middleware file to the same node that is running your actual Next.js application, but it's good to point out that serverless functions technically could be running on the edge network as well. This diagram makes me miss PHP. Technically, you could deploy a PHP app this way. All of this to say, it hits that middleware, the request gets fired off, sent onto your Next.js application, and then your Next.js application works in a specific way as well. So if you're using the app router, the Next.js application uses streaming. So what it's going to try to do is actually respond with basically the top of the document first as fast as possible. So let's just call this like the head. And it's more than just the head. We'll call it like the head HTML or like head app, because and this should actually be like a different color. Please, like this. So it takes this and then it actually immediately responds with that, right? So it's my arrows aren't gonna work out here, but like it immediately responds with that. And then like your layout file might kick in. And then that might asynchronously render one of your pages, right? Because your page might be like an async component. Like this, et cetera, et cetera. And so this is one of the reasons why Next.js can't have middleware over here, because it immediately starts responding with the head. And because it's already sent back the response, there's no way to modify the headers. There's no way to modify that request that it's already started responding with. And then on the serverless function itself, it's going to render that layout. It's going to render all of the pages. Those get loaded in. And then finally, you're going to have some sort of like bundle that is like the rest of the app. And then finally, Next.js will respond with like the rest of the app. And so this gap right here is the reason why we can't have middlewares inside of Next.js deployed to Vercel. Essentially, the request has already been sent back to the user that made the request, and so there's no way to modify that request when all of this streaming is happening. Okay, we're on an ad break. I'll take a breath. While we're on the ad break, ask me questions about this diagram or clarifications. Is this the reason it's hard to deploy Next.js app to other services besides Vercel? Technically, you don't even have to worry about all of this. And actually, Lee Robinson posted a video like yesterday about how to deploy a Next.js app in a VPS and a Docker container. It's possible to just run a Node.js application as a single process. I don't think it's hard to deploy just a plain old Next.js app elsewhere. What's hard is to replicate all of this scalability that Vercel gives you. I think that's really what people mean when they say that it's hard to deploy Vercel elsewhere. And on top of that, because this diagram gets even more complicated when we're talking about like the caching that Vercel does and everything else that it does to try to optimize requests, I think the hard part is re-implementing the scaled deployment and scaled architecture that Vercel gives you. It's super easy to run a Next.js app on a single node. Like, you literally just run it with Node.js, no issue. But when you want to start scaling, that's basically what Vercel gives you, and why I've lost my train of thought. Hopefully that helps, Steve. Yeah, I have seen bolt.new. Bolt.new is okay. On principle, it seems awesome. One of the first things I tried to do with V0 and also with bolt.new is I want it to create an app that allows me to drag and drop components. I was not able to do that. And Mike C is saying you could mimic this with Google Cloud Run, but I think it's more that allowed this to built in. Yeah, so that's why frameworks like SST exist, because they essentially allow you to take a Next.js application and then deploy it yourself to AWS in a more scaled way. There's also like OpenNext. I think it does a similar thing. I don't know. What's the difference between SST and OpenNext? But basically, these offerings try to give you this on your own infrastructure. So basically, you just put in your AWS keys and Okay, SST uses OpenNext. Good to know. Thank you, Italic. But basically, yeah, you give it your AWS keys, and then it spins up all the infrastructure. It'll spin up load balancers, serverless functions. It basically can do all of this on your own infrastructure. Yeah. Oh, no. They have not cut the free tier. No, we're just explaining how Vercel works in order to explain how Next.js works, and in order to explain how middleware is not what it can't be what it normally is when it's running on Vercel. Okay, I'll check your DM, Fob. We still have about 45 seconds on the ad break. Oh, nice. I don't think I'll talk about this today, Fob, because I have like 2 more news stories to cover. But it is cool. I have heard of the CSS masonry specification that's coming out. Yeah. For production apps for clients, would you recommend SST or Coolify? So this question is coming from iTreen. It depends on your needs, right? Because a single VPS, even like a beefy VPS, so let's say it has like a ton of RAM, like tons of CPUs, it could still run a single Next.js application and serve up thousands of users. But then you have to think about, well, are my users all around the world? Or like, yeah, do they exist in different locations? Do I need it to be fast for other certain people? So that's why the deployment gets a lot more complicated. And where something like SST could help, but it really comes down to like your needs. Like what kind of users do you have? Where are they in the world? How many of them are there in the world? How many of them are there in each place in the world? And so, yeah. We have the long ad breaks so that people don't get pre-roll ads. So now that those ads happened, for the next 30 minutes or so, no one gets an ad coming into my stream. Yeah. And what's up, Blinky Doo says, your syntax videos about self-hosting on a VPS made me a lot less resistant of self-hosting. I'm glad to hear it. I kind of wanted to demystify like setting up your own servers and stuff like that. Okay. There was a question coming in. Let me see who asked it. Yeah, this was from Anthony from Lithuania. The red arrows in your chart, how does that happen in terms of networking? And so what I talked about right here was the moment your Next.js application is done rendering basically the top of the document. So the head, all of the links, everything until that first page boundary or that first suspense boundary, all of that gets immediately returned to the client. And in terms of networking, it's just an HTTP response. So one of the aspects of HTTP responses is that they can take as long as you need them to. I'm trying to, if anybody in the chat, can you think up or think of anybody that's done a good example of how an HTML page can be like streamed letter by letter to the client? Because that's basically, you could implement an HTTP server that sends one letter at a time. And so like, I mean, imagine your, let's see, can we look at the source of this? Yeah, so imagine you're an HTTP server and you want to send back this HTML to the client. You could literally send it character by character, like every second. So send this, and then a second later 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 send it. Like that's just called streaming. So it's literally, instead of waiting for the whole thing and then sending it all back, it is sending little by little. And so basically what happens here with this first response is it sends back the document up until a certain point, and then all of the processes and stuff like that run that need to render the pages that will then get inserted into the document in that specific spot. So Stony has a link for us. Let's check it out. Am I going to get rickrolled? Streaming request. Oh, nice. This is from it's from 4 years ago from the HTTP 203 podcast.
3, 2, 1.
3. Nice. Okay. Do they have a diagram? Let's see. You didn't rickroll me. Cool. Yeah, so I think in this code example here, they're showing that you can actually read a response from a server like little by little instead of like waiting for the whole thing. And that's what web browsers are written to do, that so that they're more performant, right? Because if we had to wait for the entire response to come back for every single website, a lot of our web browsing would be slow. I mean, a lot of our web browsing is slow. But this whole idea of streaming is just, you can just do it according to the HTTP specification. There's nothing crazy about it. It's literally just sending the stuff as it's available instead of waiting until all of it's available. And so that's kind of what happens here with Next.js streaming. So let me just annotate this. I'll talk back through it. And then we'll move on from there. Yeah, so this spot right here. Oh, we're talking about news. I'm explaining so I can explain the news, the real droid. Okay, so the stream starts here. And then there's like some processes to do the rendering here. And then finally, the stream ends here. Okay. At this wrong because at no point is there a direct connection between. Yeah, I mean, you're completely right, Trick. like technically, this is responding, which then is like forwarding the response. Yeah, you're right. Right. It's a gross simplification, but can we suspend our disbelief in order to try and explain the streaming aspect of all of this? Okay. High-level overview. User sends in a request. That request then hits some sort of load balancer that decides which edge node to serve that response from. These edge nodes exist all around the world, potentially like in every major city, but the whole goal of this is to respond really close to your users. The middleware files that you write are their own little functions living on the edge here. So when the request comes in, it's going to hit that middleware living on that edge function. That middleware does what it needs to do, and then it forwards the request on. And so that will then hit some sort of load balancer. From there, it'll hit the serverless functions. These serverless functions could also be on the edge network, but they also could just be in one specific region. And then from there, your Next.js app is going to start to try and render the application. And the way that the app router works is it works through streaming. So the Next.js app is going to stream back just the beginning of the document. Then it's going to attempt to render pages and the layout and everything else. But that's all happening on the server, but your client has already received the beginning of the document. And then after this is all done rendering and you're reading from the database and everything else, it'll send back the end of the document. And then finally, the user has the full-on response. But the whole point of showing you this diagram is if in talking about wanting to have true middleware where we modify the request or we change the headers or whatever else, the thing to think about is the moment that this stream starts back to the user, we can't change the request headers anymore. At that point, we've already sent the initial request headers. There's no way to add new cookies or do anything else. And so that's why you can't have middlewares here in your Next.js application that set middlewares or that modify the outgoing response or whatever else. So all of that to say, yeah. The response comes back through the same path as it got in, but is missing the data that takes a while to compute. It will then send the rest of the data while the first part is already rendered. Yeah, that's good. That's good to point out, Stony. Like this red line is a lie because technically it's going to find its way back to the user, not directly, but via the network or whatever else. Okay, so that is the limitation of middlewares. That is why we can't have middlewares inside of our Next.js application. So here comes the news. We're getting route level middlewares, but we're not. It's a lie. They're called request interceptors. And here's the idea. You can put a file inside of your Next.js application in any folder in any route called intercept.ts, and then it can do some middleware logic. But the only type of logic it can do is a redirect or throw an error. If it redirects, that is going to basically inside of your Next.js application determine what other page should be rendered. It's not it's actually impossible for these redirects to return an actual like 301 or 302 redirect to the end client. Because at that point, the headers have already started sending back. And then if these interceptors throw an error, then if you have some sort of error boundary, then that will get hit inside of your Next.js application. And so probably the best use case for these is authentication and authorization. You can see in their PR. So the PR is here. it currently is a draft, meaning it needs review and people are going to have to look at it before it actually gets merged in. And once it does get merged in, it is experimental. So in order to use this in your Next.js application, you'll have to say experimental, interceptors true, and then you can try to use these things. But like the best example to look at is like some sort of auth example, right? So you could put this intercept.ts in a specific folder. And in that folder, you can grab the current session using your auth framework. And then if the session doesn't exist, you redirect them back into the sign-in page. Deco Disney, thank you very much for that sub. Appreciate that. And so this is great, right? Because the whole idea here is you could pick any page, deeply nested page, anywhere inside of your Next.js application, put that intercept.ts, and it's going to be able to redirect. But that's pretty much all these interceptors can do. They can either redirect or they can throw an error. They can't modify the response. They can't, Abdul, thank you for the prime as well. They can't modify the response. They can't add new cookies. They can't just add new headers. They can't do anything with the actual response because the response has already started to be sent back to the client. There's no way to actually modify that. And so that's why, while this is nice, this is going to help a lot of people with the use case of like, yes, I need to protect this one specific route. It is not actually middleware, and there's other use cases where you potentially want to be able to set cookies or modify the request headers or whatever else that you cannot do inside of these interceptors. There's one other thing I want to mention about this, though. It casually opens my Next app. Can you give a super fast comparison of how Svelte handles this? Same or different? I'm not super familiar with how Svelte does things. I know that Svelte has asynchronous resolver. So I know that it's possible that you can actually return a promise from a server-side loader, and then that promise can be resolved inside of the client. But I think the way that it works is it ultimately turns that into some kind of like async request that happens on the client. I can't speak to it. I'm not super familiar. I think Svelte can do streaming as well. But yeah, I'm not super familiar with how SvelteKit does it. Yeah, I am not. I am in Colorado. One more thing I wanted to mention about these. Oh yeah, okay. The other aspect of deciding to use one of these interceptors is it is now blocking. Because if we look at our diagram from earlier, if you have a layout and it renders multiple async components, so let's call this just like an async page, and then maybe this even has like a nested async page that it needs to load in order for it to resolve, and then like maybe you even have like a page that has like two components on it that are both async, like this. Let's say this is your structure. Like you have your layout, but then you have like the top section and then maybe the side section of your page, which are both async components because they need to read from the database or something like that. When you introduce one of these interceptors, it will be blocking. These pages will not even attempt to render until the interceptor is finished with doing the work that it's doing. So we add the interceptor right here. And the whole idea is in order for this to work properly, these can't be rendered asynchronously and at the same time until the interceptor resolved. And so that's the other implication is you have to think of these as blocking. You have to think of them as if I add an interceptor here, everything below it has to literally wait until that interceptor resolves before it can even start rendering or before it can even start reading from the database. So that is Next.js interceptors. The PR is here. You can take a look at it. You can also take a look at the tweet, which I'll link. But that's my take on it. It's like, it's fine. I think it solves mainly the use case for redirecting in terms of like authentication or maybe like a not found route or something like that. But that's about it. Every other aspect of middlewares it cannot do. And that's why I'm still not that happy with it. It's absolutely not in production yet. It's first of all, it's a draft PR, meaning this PR needs to be reviewed by people on the Next.js team, and also like they'll comment on it and everything else. And then after that, once it gets merged in, it will still be labeled as experimental. So if you want to use it in your Next app inside of your config, you'll say experimental interceptors true, and it's technically experimental. Things could break, and then eventually, once they become stable, then you don't have to add this to your Next config anymore. But yeah, that's interceptors. They're fine, but they're not actually middlewares. We should not call them middlewares. Okay, thanks for watching. All right, there was that. I think lastly, I'll touch on it quickly. I don't think I'm gonna have time to talk about the new Drizzle release. I'll just go over it super quick. I won't be able to pull up an example or anything like that. But yes, we're gonna talk about Lucia next because that's the big news. Okay. Yes. All right. I should take a quick pause. What is their website? This is their website. Okay. Let's get into it. It's pretty sad. I mean, we'll talk about it because, we'll talk about it. Hello, friends. Welcome to Coding Garden. We have some sad news. Lucia, the auth framework for backend JavaScript and TypeScript, is being deprecated. So there is an issue on the Lucia repo by the maintainer, Pilcrow on Paper. And they talk about how over the next year, they are going to be completely deprecating the library. Now, this for a lot of people, like when they hear this, they're like, what? I just added Lucia into my app. I built an app and I am like dependent on Lucia. What do you mean it's going to be deprecated now? Let's talk about his post here. I'll try to summarize as best I can. And ultimately, it's gotten to the point where the library itself has become very hard to maintain. And the maintainer mentions that when they're implementing auth in their own apps, they don't even use the Lucia library itself. Now, it's important to note that the author, Pilcrow on Paper, is also the author of lower level authentication and authorization and security-related packages. And we'll talk about how if you're adding Lucia to an app right now, I think you'll still be fine because there are multiple implications. Somebody could decide to fork it and maintain that fork. Also, the Lucia code that you add into your application is so like it doesn't touch a lot of the other stuff. It requires a lot of manual configuration that you could have implemented auth yourself to begin with, which is what I'll talk about as well. Pilcrow on Paper is also the author of Arctic. So this is a library that allows you to do OAuth inside of your JavaScript applications. And it's really good. And you can use this in conjunction with Lucia, and Lucia uses this under the hood. And they're also the author of Oslo, which is other auth related utilities. So this has utilities for working with cookies, utilities for encrypting, utilities for working with JSON web tokens, for doing OAuth, password hashing, CSRF, like all of the things that you typically need to do when you're implementing authentication and an authorization. This library has it. And this library is not going away. Pilcrow on Paper is going to keep maintaining this library. And essentially, their whole idea is instead of trying to have a full-on auth solution, they are going to have basically a guide for auth. They're going to create a website that talks about how to implement auth and then potentially has a lot of copy-paste examples that use libraries like this that are tried and true and tested and do the specific things that you need. But by doing that, now every application's implementation of auth can be more fit for purpose and do the things that they want to do instead of Lucia needing to be a one-size-fits-all auth solution. And so if you take a look at the link here, he has an early preview of it where basically it's just going to be a resource for working with auth. Yeah, and that's what a lot of people have compared it to, Meso, is shadcn for auth. So if you look at some of the replies in the issue here, some people are like, yeah, but what if we had a CLI tool where, let's see, shadcn. Yeah. What about Lucia init, similar to shadcn, which implements the session logic, but just copy paste the code. Instead of actually installing the Lucia library, it installs all of these sub dependencies or something like that. And I would be cool with that. That's completely fine. But Diamond is mentioning it's already bare bones. That's my take already. When I heard this news, I was like, it's not that big a deal because I've implemented Lucia into 3 different applications, and every time I was like, okay, well, that was easy enough, but I kind of could have just done this myself. Like I have enough experience and I've worked in enough applications that I know what's required to implement auth. I know that I shouldn't implement my own encryption functions. Like I know that I should reach for tested libraries and libraries that are secure to do those types of things. But at the end of the day, when you're actually implementing auth yourself, it's kind of just like puzzle pieces. It's kind of just like taking all of the things that handle cookies or all of the things that handle encryption or encoding, and then just putting them all together in a specific way that works with your application. I definitely want to do that, Blinky Do, because even Scott and Wes have talked about auth from scratch on the podcast. And so that was my experience with Lucia. I was like, yeah, it's fine, but at the end of the day, I could have just done this myself. And in the most recent app that I was implementing with Lucia, which was a Hono app, I added Lucia in, but ultimately I didn't want to be using cookies for auth, because a lot of times when you build an API that doesn't just have one client and it's not living on the same domain, you can't do your authentication, or you can't do your authorization with cookies because those cookies will not work across domain. So you actually do need something like JSON Web Tokens. And so when I added Lucia in, I kind of like copy pasted all their example Hono code in, was like, well, yeah, well then I don't need the sessions and I don't need the cookies. And at this point, I could have just used like my own, I could have just used a standard JWT library to generate the token and then just set it on the header. Like I didn't actually need the full Lucia library. So I actually don't think this is that big of a deal. I think ultimately, even if you're implementing Lucia in your app today, the amount of code that you have to add in anyways makes it so that it was a custom implementation. And so that if some fork comes along, let's say somebody comes along and they're like, okay, we like Lucia in its current implementation and we're going to keep maintaining it. Ideally, it would just be like a drop-in replacement, right? So ideally, if somebody forks it and decides to actually maintain it in its current state, you could just replace the package name and it just keeps working with all the stuff that you're already using it for. One of the main things that the maintainer mentions is that the database adapters had significant complexity. So one of the things that people typically want with an auth package is they wanted to just write the users and read the users from their database automatically. And that requires some sort of adapter. But there's a lot of different types of ORMs and databases that people use, right? So like Prisma and Drizzle are pretty popular in the world of, in our world, but also you might be using like MongoDB or Mongoose, or maybe you're using like the native driver or something like that. And so in order to maintain this number of adapters that are like zero config, you literally just pass in the adapter, and as long as your database has the same schema that it's expecting, it's able to insert users, read users, validate user passwords, that kind of thing automatically. That's where a lot of the complex code is. And ultimately, that code could just be moved into your code base, right? So like the library could essentially provide a callback that says user valid. Now, inside of that function, you can look them up in your database, or you can like validate their password or hash their password or something like that. And that way, the library itself doesn't have to actually maintain these database adapters that are doing all of that work for you. And it actually reminds me of Passport.js. So I don't know if you all remember Passport, but whenever you implement Passport, Passport did not have database adapters. Passport always just had callbacks where it was up to you to insert the user into the database. It was up to you to hash the password. And so every single one of their strategies just gave a callback where you implement the work. And people there were like userland libraries, like third-party libraries that you could plug into Passport that would handle this logic if you were using that specific type of database and your tables had that specific structure. But almost every app I implemented Passport in, I wrote this callback function from scratch and just inserted the user into my database in the way that I needed to. So ultimately, you have time. So Pilcrow on paper is saying that it's going to be deprecated early next year. So you have a few months. And from there, they're still going to be maintaining libraries that are used for auth and maintaining a resource that'll tell you how to implement auth. So I think what it will look like is once the library is deprecated, somebody, and even maybe Pilcrow, will create some sort of guide that says, how do you go from an app that was implemented with Lucia to an app that is implemented on my own using all of these various libraries? And so you could just think of that as another version bump or another migration, where instead of pulling things in directly from Lucia, you're now going to be pulling them in from these various libraries and then updating your app accordingly. So I don't think it's that big a deal. I think you're going to be okay. And there are other auth solutions. There is a really good reply in the issue here that just gives a list of all the potential ways that you could implement auth. So first of all, you could use an auth platform. So instead of adding it into your own code base, there's all these platforms and open source tools that you can host yourself that are basically like user management, identity management, and then you don't have to have the auth code yourself. But then beyond that, probably the biggest competitor and the thing that's probably going to do the best in the JS ecosystem is a library called auth.js. And a lot of people will potentially migrate to this. Now, it's still technically experimental. It's not, I believe it's in beta. It's not officially a stable release yet, but they're getting there. They've been working on it for like over a year at this point. And it supports a lot of different frameworks, and people have built adapters for other frameworks as well. So going forward, auth.js is probably going to be the main solution that a lot of people reach for. Better Auth is a newer one that I only heard about because somebody mentioned it in like a Twitter reply. But this is their attempt to implement something that's like framework agnostic, like auth.js, but in a slightly different way. So Better Auth is potentially something to look out for as well. So you'll have options. I don't think it's the end of the world. And open source is hard. Open source is very hard. So I absolutely feel for Pilcrow on paper, like feeling just overwhelmed with potentially the amount of issues or the amount of maintenance that needs to be done. Give them some slack, because it's not going to be that bad. And yeah. And also, like, auth doesn't have to be that hard. I think ultimately it's going to create developers that know more about how to implement auth and all of the parts and pieces. Is auth.js not next.auth? They are. So auth.js comes from the same people that gave you next.auth. And so next.auth has been the standard for authentication in Next.js for a very long time now. Now it's stable. People use it. But next.auth version 5 officially will be auth.js, but that's still in beta. So if you look at their Next.js package, yeah, I guess if we go to getting started. Yeah, right now, if you were to use next.auth, or if you were to use auth.js instead of the official next.auth package, you need to install the beta. But it is currently in beta. It's not stable. And this is version 5. If you install version 4, that's the stable one that is specific just to Next.js. Okay, so that's all I have to say about that. There are some weird and mean comments in the replies here, so if you can, just go downvote them. Show all of your support for Pilcrow, and also, show your support. I think, do they have GitHub sponsorship? Yeah, go sponsor them, because they maintain Lucia right now. They're also maintaining all of these other auth libraries. So, that's all I have to say about that. Thank you for watching. Okay. All right. Last thing is there's a new Drizzle release, and it is awesome. Yeah, what's up, Lulin? How do we humans feel today? I feel pretty good. I was tired, and then I remembered I hadn't had any caffeine. And so now I'm doing all right. All right. Yeah, big ups to all the open source maintainers. I absolutely agree. Oh, and I mean, this is another thing to mention. If you had not heard about it, the open source pledge. So Sentry launched the open source pledge, where, they were a part of the launch, where they are giving... it's a big number. Let's get the official number. Giving a ton of money to open source projects. Yeah, so the open source pledge was an initiative launched by several companies to basically say that they're going to start giving back to the community, because a lot of private companies are based on and wouldn't even be here without a lot of open source projects, open source solutions, etc. And that's why they're making this pledge. So you might have seen in that tweet there, like there's a ton of really big companies that are taking the pledge, like all of the companies listed here, to basically give back to open source. They could help so much to keep Lucia alive, potentially, but I don't know if it's a money issue for them. It probably comes down more to like a time and mental capacity issue more than it is just money. But I guess with money, they could hire a maintainer, a developer. I don't know. But Italic is asking, does Sentry own Syntax? They do. So roughly 2 years ago, Sentry acquired Syntax so that every single Syntax episode is just brought to you by Sentry. We don't have any other advertisers on the podcast. And then about a year ago, Sentry allowed Syntax to hire me to make YouTube videos for them. So when you head to the Syntax YouTube channel, I've been making like deep dives into various topics that are covered on the podcast, and that's possible because Sentry owns Syntax, and like they can pay me, and they can pay a team to run the Syntax team, and we'll probably be expanding more eventually as well. Oh, thank you, Italic. Appreciate that. So yeah, check out the open source pledge, but specifically, Sentry is giving the Syntax team $50,000 to allocate to whatever open source projects we want to, specifically the Syntax team. Me, Wes, Scott, the rest of the team, we have $50,000 that we can play with to give to whoever we want. And so yeah, overall, the Sentry company in total is giving $750,000 back to open source. So we need input from you. So if you know of an open source project that you think Syntax specifically should support with this $50,000, go to syntax.fm/OSS, fill out the form, and we're going to tally up all of the responses that we get. And I think Scott and Wes are specifically going to do an episode where they talk about the projects that we're going to contribute to and donate to. We're probably going to pick a lot of things that we use, right? So like syntax.fm is an open source project that's built on open source technologies. It's built on SvelteKit and other various libraries. And we potentially will support the tools that we use. So yeah, check it out. syntax.fm/OSS. Give us a suggestion of who we should support, because we have $50,000 to play with. Okay. And honestly, I guess it's not official, but we're probably going to support Drizzle. Yeah, it's interesting. It'll be interesting to choose, because I know some open source projects already have big company backings. I would want to focus our efforts and focus our donations on projects that are just a few people. Maybe they're not backed by a company already, because like technically the developer of Hono works at Cloudflare, but actually I don't know the relationship there. I don't know if he was like working on Hono first and then got hired by Cloudflare. Regardless, Hono would be good too if it needs help. Okay, the last news today is we're gonna talk about the release of Drizzle. Yeah, I did, Zolo. I started listening to Syntax probably even back in 2015. How long have they been around? I feel like maybe even before that. Is the Syntax website broken? Maybe it's just broken inside of Firefox. Maybe someone's DDoSing our server. Maybe my internet's down. 2017? Okay, maybe I lied then. I was listening to them before they existed. But I feel like I've listened to some very early episodes. I've listened to them for a very long time, so yes. The Syntax site is not working. Is my internet down? No, this site works. Okay. Let's talk about Drizzle. Yes, is everybody going there to contribute to open source? Hello, friends. Welcome to Coding Garden. We've got big news. Drizzle has a brand new version. So version 0.34 is out, and it's amazing. It's what we've all been waiting for. So over on the Syntax channel, I've done a couple of videos where I use Drizzle. Specifically, I have a video where I showed how to set up like a complex schema with Drizzle. And then in my most recent video where I was covering Hono, I show how to use Drizzle inside of that Hono application. But one of the things I cover in this video is just how do we structure the code in a more reusable way. And before, the docs were a little bit messy in that like every single different kind of database that you wanted to support, or every single different kind of platform you wanted to support, had like a slightly different code example. Now it's all unified. So they have this thing called the mono driver. And it, first of all, just because they implemented that, it made the docs so much easier to follow. So check out this tweet from Drizzle. First of all, they show, I want to talk about the mono driver first, because it used to be that for any given database you wanted to support, you specifically had to import the library, like Drizzle ORM / that type of database or / that type of driver. And you had to import the connector. So for instance, if you wanted to connect to Terso, you would have to import the libsql client and also import Drizzle / libsql, and then connect those two things together. Now with the mono driver, the first argument here to Drizzle is just the thing that you want to connect to. And they've written all the code that can handle making sure that you're passing in the right connection logic and everything else. And so the docs have gotten a lot simpler. So let's say you want to connect to a Postgres database, go to their Postgres docs, basically choose your driver, and then just import from Drizzle ORM connect. So this is their mono driver, where it literally accepts every type of database, so every type of Postgres, MySQL, SQLite database. And then the types flow through, and it'll ask you for the right settings based on the database that you passed in. So that's the first big win, is the way that you create a Drizzle instance is so much easier now, and it's kind of the same across all of these. So even if I look at the docs for MySQL, look at this. It's basically the same as for Postgres, except I pass in MySQL. And if I look at the ones for SQLite or libsql, same thing, I just pass that in there. So they figured it out. Like personally, I was working on a project where it would allow you to do this, because I didn't know that they were working on this. Like I had this whole idea. I was like, what if you could instantiate Drizzle by literally just passing in what you wanted to do? But they implemented it. So that's awesome. So first of all, so much easier to follow. It's so much easier to create instances. Second, it's super easy to create schemas now. So it used to be, and actually let me pull up just a code example. We'll look at my Hono example, Hono Open API Starter. Schema, yes. So if this project is using the older version of Drizzle, I'll need to update it. But it used to be that when you were defining columns, you kind of had duplicate logic, right? So you would have the column name as the key on the object, and then you had to pass the column name into the specific function here. Now, this is nice if, for instance, you want to have kebab case inside of your database, but then use camel case or camel case in your code base. So in your database, the column name has an underscore, but in your code base, you're using camel casing. This is nice for that. But for all of the use cases where the column name is exactly the same in my code base as the name in the database, now it's so much simpler. Now you can literally just call the function, and whatever the name is on the left-hand side, that's what it's going to be inside of the schema as well. So this greatly simplifies that code. You don't have the duplication of like column name in the object and column name inside of the column creator. Yeah. And Ryan has a really great point. And I think that this is one of the things that kind of was required to make them even more competitive with something like Prisma, because Prisma is that way in that you just say what database you want and the schema is exactly the same and you don't have to worry about finding the specific connector. But now with Drizzle, it's going to be a very similar thing. It's much easier to get up and going, and people don't have to worry about all the details. They can just pass in the thing that they want to connect to, very similar to Prisma. So lots of niceties. The docs are much easier to follow, a lot more consolidated. This was my other gripe and issue with the docs before. Like when you looked in the SQLite section, there were like 10 different sections, and each one was slightly different in telling you how to create the connection and then how to create the tables or whatever else. But now it's nice and consolidated. Is a beautiful thing. Now is definitely the time to start learning and pick up Drizzle if you have not yet. Yeah, and they're on their way to a version 1.0 release. So you may not have known, but they're actually still sub version 1. Like technically, it's experimental. Each new release is a potential breaking change because it's sub V1, but they're working towards it. And so right now they're 40% of the way there. And that's awesome. So yeah, shouts out to the Drizzle team, especially Alex, who's one of the contributors. So this post, he talks about all of the work that needed to be done and shows some of the updates that happened. So that's awesome. And I am an open source contributor. I got my PR merged into Drizzle. Is it Drizzle ORM? Is it Drizzle team? Yeah, I got my PR merged into Drizzle like 3 hours after the release because there are a couple of issues. So specifically with the library, there were some spots with the new mono driver where they forgot to add import extensions. So it was like a crazy morning for me because I was like working on a video. I was like, oh, new Drizzle version, I should try it. And then I added it and I tried to deploy it and it didn't work. And then I debugged it and figured it out. But basically their mono driver needed to have these extensions on them because the driver is being used in environments where it's using like module.js where extensions are required. So I added those in. That got merged in, and then Alex added this commit that made sure that in the future, if they add aliases, it would still work as well. And then I updated the docs. So there's actually a bug in this tweet where right here on line 1, they actually need to be importing from drizzle-orm/connect because the new mono driver isn't the main export here. You have to export it from a submodule. So the docs were out of date. When you looked in the docs before, all of these examples didn't have /connect on there. So I made that PR to their docs, and that got merged in as well. So I'm an open source contributor. Okay, but that's it for the updates to Drizzle ORM. Try it. I'm definitely going to try it. I'm probably going to do a more in-depth tutorial now that we're getting closer to stable and it's a lot easier to use. So that's it. That's all. Thanks for watching. Okay. How to integrate Typeform with React. What is Typeform? Oh. Do they have an API? That would be the way to do it. If they have an API, that's how you implement it. Somebody might have implemented a component for it as well. Yeah. Philippe is saying, I just wanted to tell you that I started coding stuff for Node because of you when the pandemic started, and now I'm in my second semester. I'm in 2 semesters in my CS Masters. That's awesome to hear, Philippe. I'm glad that I could inspire you to code. Yeah. Hedgehog is asking, what about MongoDB and other DBs like that? Isn't Drizzle only for SQL and Postgres such thing? Yes. So I don't know if it's on the roadmap for Drizzle to support Mongo. It is mainly a tool for working with SQL databases, whereas Prisma technically can work with Mongo databases as well. So yeah, that's a good indication, or like good separation to make. But yeah. Oh yeah, nice to hear it, BJ Sebastian. So they're saying, I started using Hono Drizzle after your syntax video, and it's great. Was using Prisma for years, but love the flexibility of Drizzle for the ability to use SQL-like or the relational-like ORM. Yeah, you can pick and choose. And the biggest sell for me on Drizzle is how the types flow through without code generation. So if you look at Drizzle Zod, you can literally just pass it a table definition. So like define your table, pass it to these functions, and you instantly have a Zod validator. So this is huge when you're building like open API docs that use Zod validators to generate the schemas, because there's no code generation. Whatever you define in your table schema instantly flows through to your Zod validators. Now, in the world of Prisma, there is like a Prisma Zod thing, but it's a generator. So like anytime your schema changes, your whole Zod thing would get regenerated. I don't know if this is the main one. Last updated 2 years ago. There might be some other ones, but this is something you could add to Prisma, but this just generates a ton of code. Basically, anytime your schema changes, it literally creates source code files that have all of the Zod validators inside of them. But the issue with that is if you need to modify those validators. So one of the things I showed in my Hono video is that if you need to change the validator based on like incoming or outgoing responses, it's very easy to do that because you have direct access to the Zod validator. And so this is something you do all the time when you're building APIs, right? You have your database schema. So this is kind of like your source of truth. This is where the data lives. But then when you're inserting data into the database, a user should not have an ID or created at or updated at, because all of that's generated by the database. When you're inserting, you only want to let the user insert name and done in this specific use case. You could think of other use cases. And so for that, you need to modify the validator, right? So in my example here, my insert schema, we get the base schema, but then we can modify it. From there, we can say, okay, well, I actually want to validate the name, make sure that it has a minimum and maximum length, and I want to make sure that done is required. And I want to make sure that the validator does not allow ID created at or updated at to be passed in. So I can just use Zod's omit here. And now I instantly have a schema and a validator that doesn't allow those extra fields to be passed in. This is something you do all the time when you're building APIs, right? Like, because you don't, it's not always one-to-one with the database. And then same thing if you're implementing like a patch schema. So let's say someone needs to update data in the database, but maybe they're only going to pass in the name key or only pass in the done key. I can use drizzle partial. And now I have the insert schema, but the properties name and done are now optional instead of being required. So it's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful workflow. I accidentally lost my chat. Let me pull it back up. But actually, I have to go anyways. I have to get to work. How to integrate stripes for payment. Follow the docs. Cypher, you're asking a lot of questions that can be answered in the documentation. and not to be mean, but I don't know where you are in your coding journey, but these are things where the answer is kind of just to do it, to go to those specific sites, to go to their specific documentation, and figure it out, and according to like how they say to do it, and then align that with your app and what you need to do. But yeah, yeah. When I tried Drizzle, I didn't have a good time because I was making an app in Next. I was implementing auth, something from Drizzle being run on the edge. I was getting errors. It was due to auth.js. I don't know. Resolved the error, forgot about it. I don't enjoy runtime errors. Most annoying so far. Yeah, I would probably blame that on Vercel and edge functions than Drizzle. But I get what you're saying. I absolutely do. Did you use Bun in prod? Thinking of using it. I have never used it in production, but I know that people are. I think do they have a stable release yet? Yeah, it's past V1, so they're claiming that it is stable. I know there are even runtimes and product offerings that let you run your code inside of Bun, like at the edge or whatever else. So yeah, people are using Bun in production. I haven't, but they are. Been watching for over an hour, tabbing between docs in this vid. Y'all be all right, Steve. We'll see you. The Google man. Yeah, and no worries, Cypher. I think so. If you haven't learned this lesson yet, one of the aspects of being a good developer is figuring out how to do it, right? Obviously, you can ask questions, but it's better to ask more pointed and targeted questions, right? So the question of how do I integrate Stripe payments? That's too high level. You should at first go to the Stripe website. You should look for their documentation. They have a spot that tells you how to implement it, but you might hit a wall somewhere. So yeah, at some point you might get to a point where like, oh, I tried implementing it, but it's not allowing Visa cards, or I tried implementing it, but I can't get the component to show up. That's a more specific error. And then that's errors that like people or things that people could help you out with. But beyond that, coding is knowing how to search the web. We talked about this in a live stream, I think last week, and even the one before. We've been talking about AI in live streams a lot lately. But the prevalence of AI tools like ChatGPT and other things like that have made it so that a lot of people don't know how to find the answer themselves anymore. They've gotten so used to just getting the answer directly back from ChatGPT that when ChatGPT can't answer something, they don't have the skills to go and find it themselves. And that's something that you absolutely need as a developer. So practice trying to answer your own questions without ChatGPT. You can still ask for advice and guidance. I mean, and that might be the way that you use AI. You might say, give me the steps required to figure out how I would implement Stripe or integrate Stripe myself or something like that. I don't know. You could phrase it in a way where it gives you the steps. I've gotten way more lazy since AI, BashX says, yeah. All right. Bun has crashed sometimes, but honestly, it's very polished and hasn't crashed in a long time. Yeah, I haven't used it much. No. Zig is not V1. Ooh, that's good to know. So Durzimba is mentioning, so Bun is built on top of Zig. Zig is a programming language. And it's not version 1? 0.13. Fascinating. I don't know enough about either of them to comment on it, but it is interesting that that's the case. Yeah, and you're welcome, Cypher. Good luck. Best of luck. Figure it out. I believe in you. A bit algorithmic and off topic. Do you think knowing time complexity of solutions is really important in interviews? This is the last question I'm going to answer, and then I got to get out of here. It's important in certain kinds of interviews because some companies specifically interview for, like, they do computer science, data structures and algorithms style interviews. And if that's the case for that company, you're going to have to know it. There are some companies that don't do that. They potentially have interviews that are more focused on the kinds of things you're going to be doing on the day-to-day versus like more theoretical knowledge. And for those interviews, you don't have to know it. The hard part is you have no idea what kind of interviews the company that you're applying to does. So ultimately, yes, I think for most people trying to find a dev job, you probably need to know the basics of finding the time complexity of an algorithm, because you might come across some interview where they do ask that. At the same time, you could use tools like Glassdoor to figure out what's the interview process at a given company. Do they ask algorithmic questions or do they do more like practical interviews? Because then you'd know whether or not you need to know that stuff. But at the end of the day, it's hard to tell because every company is different. All right, that's all I got. Thank you, everybody, for hanging out. This has been a fun edition of, I don't know, dev news, but I'm going to get out of here. Hopefully I'll see you again next week. I don't have an official streaming schedule. Mainly it's just I wake up on Wednesday, figure out is today an okay day to stream, and then I do it. But I'll see you soon, hopefully. And also head over to Syntax on YouTube. I'll be publishing a video there tomorrow that shows how to deploy a Hono application to render.com, to fly.io, to Vercel, to Cloudflare workers. I show how to deploy a Hono app in like a bunch of different ways. So go check that out tomorrow on the Syntax channel. All right. That's all I got. Stick around for the raid. If you're watching over on YouTube, head over to Twitch. You can join us in the raid. And wherever you are in the world, have a wonderful morning, afternoon, evening, or night. And until next time, here's this.